such a scheme could not go ahead, we thought, without the permission of the Home Office until that new guidance came from the Lord Advocate yesterday.
Okay, so how likely then do you think it is that we will see a drug consumption room?
Certainly the momentum appears to be building towards one. The Lord Advocate says she'd be willing to modify current policy on the prosecution of drug offences. The Lord Advocate Dorothy Bain KC, and she says she'd be prepared to publish a prosecution policy where it would not be in the public interest to prosecute drug users for simple possession within a pilot, say for drugs consumption facility. Now the Scottish Government is in favour of the plan for a pilot scheme because it argues it could reduce the risk of users overdosing and could improve their chances of recovering from addiction. Of the other main political parties in Scotland, the Conservative, Labour and the Lib Dems and the Greens would also back a pilot, while the Scottish Conservatives have said they wouldn't block one. And as we've been hearing, it sounds increasingly likely that the expectation is in Scotland that the Home Office would not attempt to find some kind of a way of blocking a consumption room from being set up in Glasgow, certainly with all the principal political parties in Scotland either positively supporting the pilot or at least saying that they wouldn't block the pilot. Would be into very interesting constitutional territory if any attempt were made to block an attempt to set up a consumption room, even though drugs policy itself is a reserved matter.
And we're expecting a statement in Parliament this afternoon. Do we know what's likely to be said?
Well, we don't know what's likely to be said, but there is a certain anticipation the statement is going to cover consumption rooms. But it does come as figures show that the number of suspected drug deaths in Scotland has risen in the first 6 months of the year. The Scottish Government statistics stating there were 600 such fatalities over the period from January to June, which is a 7% increase in the same time last year. Certainly I would be surprised if this issue was not addressed in that update.
Okay, Jamie McIver, our news correspondent then.
Now, an Assistant Chief Constable of Police Scotland has warned that budget pressures are starting to have a psychological impact on the force's front line. Stephen Johnson says a smaller number of officers are being pushed harder because of an increasing workload and a fall in officer numbers. Our Home Affairs correspondent David Cowan joins us now. So, David, let's start with the background to this. Why has this come up today?
Well, it came up this morning, Hayley, at the Scottish Police Authority's Policing Performance Committee. It was looking at a report from the force on what's been happening from April to June this year, and that report contained a pretty grim assessment from the Deputy Chief Constable Alan Spears. He talked about the force's funding allocation for this year representing a real terms reduction, so they've had to reduce their officer numbers from 17,234 to 16,600, and that's the lowest it's been since 2008. And at the same time, it's had to deal with an increasing demand for its services, so the force is having to tailor its response because of that to areas of the highest threat, risk and harm. The general message from the Deputy Chief Constable was that the forces may have to take longer to do what it needs to do, it may have to do things differently, and it may have to reduce the levels of service it provides to the public in some areas.
So why has there been an increase in demand?
Well, in the months we're talking about, there was a period of warm weather. The police say that will have been a factor in things like an increase in common assaults. There's also been a general ongoing trend of an increase in some crimes. So the report contains lots of figures. Just very briefly, there's been a rise in violent crime, a rise in rape, a rise in online child sexual abuse, and also a rise in fraud. And the detection rates for all of those are going down. So you're looking generally at a picture of more crimes being reported, and that's led to a result in a reduction in the detection rate.
And what else did Steve Johnson then have to say to the committee?
Well, following that forward in the report from Deputy Chief Constable Alan Spears, Assistant Chief Constable Steve Johnson was asked about it by the committee today. He's in charge of local policing for the west of Scotland, down to Dumfries and Galloway, and he painted a picture of his officers being so busy responding to reports of ongoing incidents that it's limiting what they can do for communities, it's limiting crime prevention work, and this increased workload is beginning to take its toll. Here's some of what he said to the committee.
I'm really concerned around the level of resource that we've got and our ability to move into that proactive space to be preventative. I'm genuinely concerned that we're pushing a smaller group of officers in the response harder. We're starting to see the growth in psychological illness grow. That, for me, is a sign of a stressor in the workforce that says we're pushing people very, very hard. I think it is a fairly pessimistic landscape, to be honest.
And Dave, did any of the committee members share his concerns?
Well, the SPA's job is to oversee what the police are doing, and one of the committee members, Michelle Miller, said, the budget situation here isn't going to get any better, so the police need to work out what their priorities are and tell the public.
We cannot just keep asking people to do more and more and more with less and less resource. We can't do that. Equally, the reality is that we have a budget, and there is no prospect at this point of that budget increasing. So you've got an unstoppable force and an immovable object here, and something has to give, and the give has to be around clarity in relation to prioritization.
Well, funding for the police ultimately comes from the government, Dave. Have they had anything to say in response?
Well, the Justice Secretary, Angela Constance, says that they increased the policing budget for this year by 6.3%, despite what she called difficult financial circumstances due to UK government austerity and the Scottish Government's fixed budget. She said that police officers have received a 12% pay increase over 2 years, meaning they'll continue to be the highest paid in the UK. And she said Scotland continues to have more police officers per capita than England and Wales, with recorded crime here at its lowest levels in nearly 50 years. So she's saying the Scottish Government is giving the police as much as it can. She's arguing that the force is in a healthy state compared to other parts of the UK. Clearly, though, the police are saying it's still not enough.
Okay, on Home Affairs correspondent David Cowan, thank you.
Almost 3,000 people have died and more than 2,500 were injured as a result of the devastating earthquake that hit Morocco on Friday. Most of the dead were buried under the rubble of collapsed buildings, but rescue operations continue with search teams from Britain, Spain and Qatar assisting the Moroccan military. But hope of finding survivors is fading. Alice Morrison is a Scottish writer who lives in a village in the Atlas Mountains, the epicentre of the disaster. Alice, what is happening round about where you are just now then?
I live in Imlil, which is right up in the High Atlas, and what we're seeing today is, the continuing, as it has been since Saturday, governmental aid programs. So the military is everywhere. Things are changing. We've just had our road cleared, for example. It was absolutely impassable 2 days ago, and I had to cycle down it because you literally couldn't get across it. You had to lift the bike over boulders, and the military have completely cleared it. So we're seeing that kind of second stage of operations, and also the citizens, we're still all sleeping out in tents because people have been told not to go back to their houses until they're sure they're safe. And the communities here are worried about aftershocks. We just had one which made me run outside my door, I have to admit, and people are worried in the night time, so they're still sleeping out in tents. And again, a lot of those have been supplied by charities, but also mainly by the government, so that people have somewhere to sleep under cover.
How strong are these aftershocks?
Well, as I say, there was one at about a couple of hours ago, and my whole house, I'm actually back in my little home overlooking the valley, and the whole house shook, and it caused me to leap out and run for the door, but then it stopped.
Yeah. The survivors still being pulled out of the rubble?
Very few. I think it's time to, it's really much more now about obviously treating the injured, and also looking at how you're going to look after people, because in Morocco, in this region, it gets extremely cold in the winter, and people without houses. I mean, when I say extremely cold, sub-zero, what are we going to do? So I think all of us who live here are now thinking, how can we get our houses either repaired or rebuilt? What are we going to do with the people who've lost everything? How can they get temporary accommodation that will actually be suitable for winter? Because winter is coming.
Are the authorities managing to reach all the rural areas that they need to reach? I mean, it sounds like from where you are, they've got access, no problem. But in other parts of the country, are they struggling?
So the main valley which was affected is the next valley down from me. So I can actually walk to it from my house in a couple of days across the mountains, which is how many of us travel here. We walk or we use mules. But the problem is there's one main road down there, like there's one main road to my valley, and the government cleared it almost immediately. The response from the Moroccan government, contrary to some reports, has been excellent, and the issue for them and for all of us is that there are many villages which are 1 or 2 days walk away from a road. So even if you cleared the road and you've got your lorries in and your trucks in, you've actually got to get to these tiny villages scattered in the mountains. It's very like the Highlands, and the communities, again, like the Highlands, can be very, very small. You could have a village, I'm calling it a village, but it might be 30 people, might be 3 families. So, getting cognizance, getting knowledge about all of those tiny, tiny places is extremely logistically challenging.
So even at the best of times, a lot of these areas are difficult to reach. What about the international help that's been on offer?
I can't speak to the politics of it, but I can perhaps balance some of the dialogue, because contrary to what's being reported, what is needed is very specific aid. It's to get to those tiny villages that haven't been seen yet. So you're looking at things like helicopter rescue, search and rescue, and a British team is here. And when the British team arrived, they told our officials that they were incredibly impressed, because normally they do this all over the world. It was only 48 hours and they got here. They said normally it takes longer. So contrary again to what's being said, the Americans are actually doing a great job on getting people here, but they have to then support them, with the equipment, with the moving stuff that they need. So if you just have people rushing in to help, it's chaos. There's one road to the main affected area, one road. If people just arrive, they just clog up the road. It has to be coordinated, which, obviously if you're sitting in the village and you need help and you're injured, that sounds ridiculous. But if 20 people come and only one person can get through, it's ineffective. So it's logistics, it's about organisation, and truthfully, this country is doing the very, very, very best it can.
Okay, Alice Morrison, Scottish writer who lives in a village in the Atlas Mountains, with her experience of what's been happening after that devastating earthquake that hit Morocco on Friday.
Join Andy Burke and Tom English at the Rugby World Cup.
So for me, Tom, a French World Cup is about the 3 Ps: passion, pastries and podcasts.
And pints.
All the news from rugby's biggest stage.
We'll preview and review every Scotland match of the tournament.
Speak to the players, coaches and some of the biggest names in the game.
World Cups, if you ask any coaches or players, they can make you or break you.
The BBC Radio Scotland Rugby Podcast. Listen on BBC Sounds.
Now, it's more than 30 years since British Airways Flight 149 touched down at Kuwait International Airport, straight into the arms of the invading Iraqi army. Well, 300 people on board were held captive, some of them for months on end, and used as human shields. Their release was secured eventually after the former Prime Minister Ted Heath flew to Baghdad to make a personal appeal to Saddam Hussein.
I felt that I couldn't go on living with myself if I refused to go to try to help those who are sick and dying, to get them back to our own country.
Well, now the hostages are demanding answers, and they're preparing to take legal action against the UK government and British Airways to get them. Jack Beeson is an associate with law firm McHugh Jury and Partners. He's been working on their case and he joins this afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
So, Jack, why is this happening now, 30 years later?
Well, there's a simple answer to that, really, which is that archival materials were released by the National Archives in 2021, which essentially prove that the government-held line that there was nothing that could have been done to divert the flight was incorrect, and in fact Parliament may have been misled during and following the crisis. So that's the sort of new information which came to light in 2021, which makes proceedings possible now.
So do they claim that flight should have been turned back before it reached Kuwait International Airport? And who do they blame for the fact that it wasn't?
I mean, that's really a question for them. I mean, you know, lots of flights at that time were being diverted or not even permitted to leave for Kuwait. This wasn't it wasn't an enormous surprise. There was reports both on the ground, in the news, globally, that an invasion was being prepared, and the accusation that our clients are making is that the flight was exploited for the purposes of an off-the-book military or intelligence operation.
Is that because there were suspicions that special forces troops were on the flight and they needed to get onto the ground?
Exactly. So essentially using the flight as civilian cover for an off-the-books military or intelligence operation. You know, there's a significant amount of eyewitness recollections that a group of men boarded the flight very late and left it very, very quickly, while the others, passengers and crew, were essentially left on the tarmac and then eventually taken hostage, and some were held for up to 5 months, first in Kuwait and latterly in Iraq.
So these are all the sort of things, are they, that your clients are hoping to prove by going to court?
That's correct. So proceedings will be issued in the High Court for damages, and I suppose it will be for a judge to determine the truth of what actually happened all those years ago.
Interesting. So Jack, thanks very much for speaking to us. Jack Beeson there, an associate with law firm McHugh Jury and Partners.
Now, it may not be a Euros qualifier, but there'll still be plenty of tension at Hampden Park tonight as Scotland take on the old enemy England. The game is taking place to commemorate the 150th anniversary of the first meeting between the two sides. It was incidentally a goalless draw on the 30th of November 1872. Well, our reporter Karen Mackay is at Hampden for us. So what is the atmosphere like there so far? We're a good few hours ahead of the game, but has anybody arrived yet?
Yeah, hi Graham, it's a lovely afternoon here in Mount Florida, but pretty quiet outside the West Stand at the moment. Of course, that's soon to change as thousands of fans arrive before kick-off at 7:45. England and Scotland meet tonight for a heritage match. As you said there, in 1872, the first derby was played at the West of Scotland Cricket Grounds. Now, for Steve Clarke's Scotland, 5 wins from 5 games has put the team within touching distance of the European Championships next year. Mixed reactions from the England fans I spoke to outside Central Station earlier. Gareth Southgate's squad are playing after a 1-1 draw with Ukraine at the weekend. Supporters from both teams gave me their pre-match predictions.
Well, I think that Scotland are obviously in form at the moment. They've got the wind up and with what's likely to be a very soon to qualify for the Euros. I'd like to think that England will be up for it. Scotland, we know, will be up for it. I think it'll be a draw.
What are you hoping for? Give me the score prediction.
2-1 Scotland, and hopefully another good performance again, like Friday night. So you never know, but it's all the enemy, anything can happen. Massive derby, well, the biggest derby in the world, isn't it? Biggest derby in the world. 2-1 Scotland.
Do you think it makes a difference playing at home in Hampden?
Be the form we're on just now. We could play anyone, beat anyone. Honestly, put any team in front of us just now, we could beat any of them.
I think we're going to win 3-1. I think it'll be highly competitive as it always is against Scotland. But yeah, I think he'll try out some of the newer members of the squad and give them a run out. So yeah, positive.
And do you tend to follow the team around the country or around the world to different matches?
Yeah, go to every home and away game for England for the last 20 years.
Every home and away game?
Yeah, every single one. So we've just landed from Poland yesterday and came straight up to Glasgow last night.
It can't be cheap though, doing all that travel.
It definitely isn't, no. It's a commitment. But yeah, we love our team, we love our country, so.
I take it Glasgow's among the best destinations you've been to in the time that you've been supporting England.
I think this is perhaps second or third time you've been back here, so yeah, obviously one of the top ones.
I don't think we'll win at all. I think Scotland always raise their game for England. It's their World Cup final always, and that's when they've been poor. You're in good form there, you beat Spain. I don't think we'll win tonight. I think 1-0 Scotland.
So you're a couple, what happens tonight? You're from England, you're from Scotland. Are you both going into the stadium or are you watching it from home?
Well, I'm not watching it in the stadium. I guess I'll watch it at home. But you're doing a family affair.
Along with my dad and a couple of others, my sister and her boyfriend as well, who are all Scottish, so get rid of her for the afternoon.
I think this is the most optimistic you can ever be with Scotland. I mean, 11 games unbeaten. It's